Bibles to Ezra. That's going to be the book that we overview and talk about tonight. Ezra and Nehemiah have been through, oh, hello there. We've got Riley's home, Emily's home. Welcome back for some of you. Ezra and Nehemiah have, through the years, been treated as one book together. So, in the Hebrew Bible and in the Septuagint, which we referred to quite a bit in these overviews, and I'll say it a million times because I know that that's unfamiliar things, but that's the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that was in use in the time of Jesus and the apostles. That's why that matters for us, because so often that's the Bible that Paul and the apostles are reading from and quoting from, and that's why it matters. The Septuagint is kind of a wild animal when it comes to Ezra and Nehemiah, because you know how the Catholic Bible has more books in it than our Bible. This is one of those places where you see that. And so in the Catholic Bible, you actually have a book that's called First Esdras. It's not Ezra, it's Esdras. It's the same kind of thing, though. It's E-S-D-R-A-S, Esdras. First Esdras is not in our Bible. Second Esdras is Ezra and Nehemiah, what we call Ezra and Nehemiah, and then third and fourth Esdras is extra stuff. And so that one's kind of interesting. But the point for this conversation is that Ezra and Nehemiah are one book. It doesn't become Ezra and Nehemiah two separate books until about the time of origin. So you move into the 200s, 200 years after the time of Jesus. And then I think maybe where it became solidified, and this is why it is what it is in our Bible, two books of Ezra and Nehemiah, is because the same thing that we talked about with Chronicles last week, Jerome's Vulgate, which is at the end of the 300s, the Latin official Bible of what it becomes the official Bible of the Catholic Church. And so that's why Ezra and Nehemiah are two books in our Bible. But all of this just to say, it's probably really helpful to treat Ezra and Nehemiah as one story, because they are kind of one linear story and they deal with a lot of the same stuff. And so we're going to break it up. We're going to do Ezra tonight, and then in the next lesson after that, we'll do Haggai, and then after that, we'll do Zechariah, and then we'll do Nehemiah after that. And there's a reason why we'll do that, and I think you'll see that reason tonight. But keep in mind that it is one story, and I think that you'll get to see some of that tonight. Just look over at Ezra chapter 8. First of all, I'm wrong about that. Nehemiah. Go to Nehemiah chapter 8, and that's where you'll see this. In Nehemiah chapter 8 and verse 9, you can see that Ezra and Nehemiah are living during the same time and they're working together on the same stuff. Adam, I was wrong about some of the things that we were talking about, and tonight I think I'll be able to clarify some of that with this. In verse 9, Nehemiah, who was the governor, and Ezra the priest, the scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, and so they go on and they do the stuff that they're doing. But the point of the story is, in fact, if you look back at chapter 8 and verse 1, there's more of Ezra in the book of Nehemiah doing the stuff that Ezra does. And so a couple things about these books as we get ready to start Ezra. Ezra is a lot about Ezra, obviously, and specifically the work that Ezra does, or that is recorded in the book of Ezra about rebuilding the temple after the destruction. Nehemiah has to do primarily with rebuilding the walls around Jerusalem. I hope that by the time we're finished with a lot of these studies that you'll just know this and you'll be able to, hey, this is what this book is about. Or at least maybe mark it in your Bible so that you can remember it and see it whenever you need it. Okay, so put your marker in Ezra chapter 1. your Bible marker, we're going to go somewhere else for just a few minutes. Go to 2 Kings 15. And you guys up here will appreciate this, I think. This is the timeline that we've been working on downstairs and going through all of these kings and understanding what's happening. The top of the timeline is the northern kingdom of Israel, and the bottom of the timeline is the kingdom of Judah. So David's descendants in Jerusalem and the temple in Jerusalem, that's all on the bottom. And the north is other things. In 2 Kings chapter 15 and verse 29, it says, in the days of Pekah, the king of Israel. So let's find him. Right here on the downward slide. Israel's almost donezo at this point. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and captured a couple of different places, all the land of Naphtali. And this is why we're here. This is what I want you to see. And he carried the people captive to Israel, to Assyria. Sorry about that. So Assyria comes down to Israel right here in a first wave of attack, and he takes a bunch of people captive. We have Assyrian records to tell us about this, and the Assyrian records tell us outside of the Bible that he took about 13,500 people captive during this time. And this is 732 BC. Turn over to chapter 17, 2 Kings chapter 17 and verse 6. I promise that this is going to be meaningful for us in our study and why we're talking about it right now. This happens, in fact, I think that this might even be useful to do this. Next to verse 6, where we're going to read about this in a second, might be useful to just write 722 BC. This is the year that Israel was destroyed, and what we're going to do is we're going to read about this right here. This is the destruction where Israel finally comes to be no more. In verse 6, in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria, captured Samaria and carried the Israelites away to Assyria. So twice now we've seen that when the Assyrians come and fight against a people, when they win, what they do is they say, all of you, you're going somewhere else. This is captivity. We're taking you out of the land and removing you from where you are and putting you into another place. Look at verse 23, at least the second part of verse 23. Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria to the day. And there's something else that happens here. It says, and the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, and all of these other places. I'm not going to try and read all of these. And what he did is he placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Israel, and took possession of Samaria and lived in their cities. So this is a really cruel thing to do whenever you capture a group of people, to say, all right, you're all going to move over here into these people, and I also capture these people, and I'm going to take these people, I'm going to say you are going to come over here. And it's just really a way, I mean, boy, to just torture. I mean, this is a torture. And you want to dominate someone, and you want to control someone and show them who's boss and don't mess with you. I'm taking you out of your land and I'm putting someone else in your land. And I think that you should read the rest of chapter 17 whenever you get a chance, because this is a story about how the people who were moved into the land of Israel, they were not Jews and they were not Israelites, and they didn't know the God of the Jewish people. And so they didn't know how to serve him, and all kinds of bad things kept happening. And so what happens in chapter 17 is there comes to be this strange mixture of the people from Babylon and other places and their religion, and they kind of incorporate it a little bit with the Jewish God and how you worship him and what you say about him. And so this is like a hybrid religion that exists in the land during this time. Keep your finger here in 2 Kings, but turn over to Ezra chapter 4, because I want you to see why we're talking about this and why this matters. In Ezra chapter 4 and verses 1 and 2, it says, "Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building the temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses, and they said, 'Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do, and we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here.' But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the rest of the heads of the father's house of Israel said, 'You have nothing to do with us in building the house of our God.'" And you might say to yourself, well, that's not very nice. It seems kind of mean, in fact, that here are a group of people who live in the land and they say, "Hey, you've come back from captivity and we worship your God too, and we want to help you build your temple." And Ezra and Nehemiah say, No, you're not going to help participate in this. And the reason is because they're not Jewish people. And they say that they worship the God of the Bible, but they don't really worship the God of the Bible. It's this strange perversion of what they brought from their own land. Halfway is probably generous. A little bit of the way mixed with the God of the Bible. And so that's some of the context and why these things are happening in the book of Ezra, and why Ezra says, no, we are not going to participate with the people of the land. You'll see a lot more of that, I think, by the time we're finished tonight. Okay, so go back to 2 Kings 24, and we'll do just a little bit more history. This is what we'll see, this bottom line here. The top line, Israel, they're destroyed. There's no more Israel at this point. But that's what this arrow is. We're going to keep this arrow going on to the next slide. And this is where we are, and this is what we're going to talk about here just real quick. And I probably won't read all of these verses. But 2 Kings chapter 24, verses 1 and 2. "In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. And the Lord sent against him band of Chaldeans, and bands of Syrians, and bands of Moabites, and bands of Ammonites, and sent against them to Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke to his servants, the prophets." So this one happens in 605 BC, where the Babylonians come up, and they don't just fight against the land, they take some of the people of the land back to Babylon with them. And this is where Daniel and his friends go. So you might read like Daniel chapter 1, I think it's the first 5 or 7 verses or somewhere in there, where it talks about how Nebuchadnezzar took some of the royal family back to Babylon with him. So there's more. There's more of this. We're coming in and we're taking you out of the place where you are. That's the theme. The captivity. We're removing you. That's why we're talking about this right now. In chapter 24, in verses 10 through 16, you have stage 2. This happens in 597, and you can see from the description here that this is where 10,000 captives are taken out of the land. That's a lot. And it's not just the 10,000 captives, but it's all the skilled laborers. In fact, if you will just read at the end of this section, what is it, about verse 16, I think it says, "The king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon all the men of valor, 7,000, the craftsmen, the metal workers, 1,000, all of them strong and fit for war. And what he did was he left the poorest in the land because he doesn't care about what are they going to do." So that's the second stage. And then in 2 Kings chapter 25, you have stage 3. And stage 3 is summarized in verse 9. And this really matters a lot for our book tonight, Ezra. In verse 9. And I know that you probably get sick of me saying this sometimes, but these verses are highlighted in my Bible so I can see it, because these are really big deals. In verse 9, this is what he did. He burned, number 1, all of verse 9. He burned the house of the Lord and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down. There's no more temple. The Jerusalem temple is gone at this point, stage 3. So we're not taking captives, we're just burning everything to the ground. It's over at this point. In verse 10, number 2, All the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard, they broke down the walls around Jerusalem. So they're going to completely ruin Jerusalem. They're going to tear down the walls. That's the second thing that happened. In verse 11, and the rest of the people who were left in the city and the deserters who had deserted the king of Babylon, together with the rest of the multitude, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, number 3, carried into exile. Everybody else goes at this point. They burn the temple, they tear down the walls, and they carry away the exiles. Now go to Ezra 1. We've done captivity. We've got 2 stages of captivity with the Assyrians. We've got 3 stages of captivity with the Babylonians. Boy, this is a rough couple of years for these people. And there's a lot of displacement. We've got this time of captivity, about 70 years of captivity in Babylon. Ezra 1 starts right here. And this is what we're going to do with Ezra. We're going to divide it into 2 sections. Ezra 1 through 6 and Ezra 7 through 10. Ezra 1 through 6 is only history from Ezra's perspective. He's not actually there doing this. He's talking about what happened back in the day. Ezra is talking about this as history. And so look at Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, the king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. And let each survivor in whatever places he sojourns be assisted by the men of this place with silver and gold, and with goods and beasts, besides free will offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. And so this starts, Cyrus the Great, the king of the Persians, says, boy, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, they were jerks. They told everybody, you have to leave your land and move out to another place. And Cyrus had such a big and unified kingdom because he went around to all of these people and he said, go back home to your place and rebuild your cities and rebuild your temples. And oh yeah, here's all your stuff back. And here's some extra money so that you can build your stuff and do your own thing. Kind of seems like a good policy. Like, we don't hate him like we hated the people who were before him. And this is one of the reasons why Cyrus and the Persians were so successful. They did this for everyone. If you did not read the article at the bottom of the Friday email, you should go back and do that, because there's actually historical evidence of this. It's called the Cyrus cylinder, where you can read about Cyrus saying outside of the Bible that I'm going to let the people go home back to their place. Look at chapter 3 and verse 10. This is going to be a major thing that happens when the people go back home. We're at 535, 536 at this point. So we go back home. We get there a couple years later. And it says, when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests and their vestments came forward. And so we have started work on the temple. We're working on doing it. But then something happens in chapter 4 in verses 1 through 6. This is what we read a second ago. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord their God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses, and they said, let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do. and we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, the king of Assyria, who brought us here. But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses in Israel said to them, you have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, king of Persia, has commanded us. Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build, and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purposes all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And so what happens here, this is why we have a comma. From 536, 535, they start and they lay the foundation of the house, but the people of the land are really upset about it, and so they discourage the people and they stop them from what they were doing. And we're not going to talk a lot about that now, because this is where Haggai and Zechariah come in. In fact, if you'll turn in your Bible to chapter 5, Ezra 5, in verse 1 it says, now the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, the sons of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who were over them. They basically said, oh no, the people of the land are against us, we're discouraged. So they stopped for about 15 years and they didn't do anything. And next week, this is where Haggai comes along. Haggai shows up at about 5:20, and Haggai says, it's time to get back to work. We started this thing 15 years ago. We got to do it. Like, it's time. It's time to build the temple. And so Haggai comes on the scene and tells the people that they need to start rebuilding the temple. In chapter 6 and verse 15, it says the house was finished on the third day of the month. This is 515 BC. And so that is history from Ezra's perspective. And we'll dive into this history, this stage 1 history, whenever we talk about Haggai and Zechariah. Chapter 7 through 10 is actually Ezra's story. Look at chapter 7 and verse 1. I guess we should probably start in verse 1. Now after this, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra the son of Sariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Shallum, the son of Zadok. There's lots of sons that you can see in verse 6. This Ezra went up from Babylonia. He was a scribe, skilled in the law of Moses that the Lord, the God of Israel, had given him. And the king granted him all that he asked, for the hand of the Lord his God was on him. So we've jumped. What are we jumping here? Like 40, 50, 60 years or so? We're jumping about 60 years into the future in the time of Ezra in 458. In verse 7. And there went up also to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king, some of the people of Israel, and some of the priests and the Levites, and the singers and the gatekeepers, and the temple servants. And Ezra came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. For on the first day of the 1st month he began to go up from Babylonia, and on the first day of the 5th month he came to Jerusalem. For the good hand of God was on him, for Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to do it and to teach its statutes in Israel. So you just read it. This is chapter 7, the rest of chapter 7 and chapter 8. This is a lot of the people who have come back with Ezra. Go over to chapter 9. This is what Ezra's actual story and what Ezra is about. And I think since we've done this history, and we're not too far removed from talking about the book of Judges especially, I think that verses 1 through 6 ought to just about knock you over in your seat whenever we read what's going on. Chapter 9 and verse 1. After these things had been done, the officials approached me and said, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the land with their abominations, from the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters to be wives for themselves and for their sons, so that this faithlessness, the hand of the officials and the chief men, has been foremost. As soon as this is Ezra, as soon as I heard this, I tore my garments and my cloak, and I pulled my hair from my head and my beard, and I sat appalled. And all who trembled at the words of the God of Israel because of the faithlessness of the returned exiles gathered around me while I sat appalled until the evening sacrifice. And at the evening sacrifice I rose from my fasting with my garment and my cloak torn, and I fell on my knees and I spread out my hands to the Lord my God. And we'll read his prayer here in just a second. But can you just think about, this chart, this is not even going to do full justice, because this started all the way back on the last page before this with the people in the time of Judges especially. But all throughout here, Israel did this exact same nonsense. They're doing the exact same thing that they've been doing all along. And God says, oh, hey, you've been doing it up here. You've been incorporating yourself with the people of the land, attaching yourself to the people of the land so that you are indistinguishable from God's people. And God said to Assyria, I'm done with you. You're gone. No more Assyria. And so God was a little bit more patient with Judah and Jerusalem, and he even gave them long periods of time and warnings. But they attached themselves to the people of the land, and they were indistinguishable from the people of the land until God finally said, all right, I'm done with you too. You're going away into captivity in Babylon. And so God finally, after the next generation of people, he says, okay, you can go back. We're going to rebuild the temple. And Ezra comes back with the people of the land, and he sees that they have done exactly the same thing that they've been doing from the beginning of their history. And I can only imagine, I cannot believe that these words are not written in the book of Ezra. But I can only imagine Ezra, like maybe this is what it means where it talks about pulling his hair out. Ezra has got to be looking at this people, knowing the history and knowing what led to this point, and he's got to say, you have got to be kidding me. We're going to do this again? We're going to do this still? And so the point of Ezra and the things that Ezra are saying to this group of people is, guys, if you're going to keep on doing the same sinful stuff that you've been doing from the beginning of time, you're going to keep on getting the same punishments that you've been getting from the beginning of time, which is captivity and destruction. It really is a hard thing. Man, it is a hard thing to stomach and to process that Israel in Ezra chapter 9 is walking down the same path as Israel was in the book of Judges. Except for, now we have Ezra. And that's the great thing about this book. Here's his prayer starting in verse 6. Oh my God, I am ashamed and blush to lift my face to you, my God, for our iniquities have risen higher than our heads, and our guilt has mounted up to the heavens. From the days of our fathers to this day, we have been in great guilt. For our iniquities, our kings, our priests, have given into the hand of the kings of the land, to the sword to captivity, plundering, to utter shame, as it is today. But now, this is Ezra's prayer, and everybody hears it. But now, for a brief moment of favor has been shown by the Lord our God to leave us a remnant, to give us a secure hold within this holy place, that our God may brighten our eyes and grant us a little reviving in our slavery. For we are slaves. Yet our God has not forsaken us in our slavery, but has extended to us his steadfast love before the king of Persia, to grant us some reviving, to set up the house of God, to repair its ruins, to give us protection in Judah and Jerusalem. And now, O our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken your commandments. Again. We've done it again. The exact same thing. And so you read through the rest of the book of Ezra, which you should do tonight. And basically this is what chapter 10 is. Ezra is awesome because he accomplishes what very few of the other leaders of God's people have been able to accomplish up to this point in our history. He stops the madness, and they fix their problem. And I'm tired, so I'm going to end here. But I'll finish with this. In Ezra chapter 7 and verse 10. This is going to be, I think, my one-sentence summary for the book of Ezra. It comes from chapter 7 and verse 10. You can read it. This is not an exact quote of it, but this is pretty much what chapter 7 and verse 10 is. This is what Ezra points us to. This is our main takeaway. Our one main takeaway from the book of Ezra and what we want to be. Ezra teaches us to set our heart to study the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach his statutes and his rules to God's people. That's who Ezra is in verse 10. Ezra set his heart to study the law of the Lord and do it. And teach his statutes and his rules in Israel. And I think you could keep that sentence going to say, so that we don't keep doing the same nonsense that God's people have done from the beginning of time. Someone has got to stop the madness. The invitation and the takeaway at this point in the lesson will be this. Don't keep doing the same things that you've been doing, or you're going to keep getting the same things that you've been getting. At some point, you got to stop the madness. You got to stop the sin and that moving away from God and violating the words and the commandments of God. And we've done it. All of us have done it. Daily, weekly, monthly in our lives, where we just continue the same path away from the Lord. And what's got to happen at some point is that you be an Ezra where you study the law of the Lord and you say, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to teach other people to stop too. And we're going to go to the Lord. If you know what you need to do tonight, that Jesus is our path of repentance, have faith and repent, confess and be baptized, and live as best you can in accordance with his word, to stop the madness and to go back to the Lord and to take as many people with you as you can. If we can help you with that tonight, come forward, make your needs known as we stand and sing the invitation song.